What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Burke, aka Dansgo8 here, and that time has finally come. This is going to be the final review episode of Final Fantasy XVI. So, there is a lot to talk about. Initially, once I completed the game, I did my kind of, reactionary thoughts upon completing the game. And since then, it has been quite some time. And what I like to do with these kind of reviews is, when I can, try to really wait until I've completed the game, I've edited all the episodes, and I've basically come close to uploading everything, and do the review as late as possible. Now, the reason I do that is because obviously I develop some thoughts while I'm playing the game and you guys hear all of those. Then I can sort of reaffirm those thoughts when I'm editing through, because I watch every single minute of footage that I've played throughout. And then because of my upload schedule, these playlists take a while to get onto the channel completely. I have a lot of time to chat to people, so I can chat to fellow content creators, I can chat to my friends, I can chat to people from my community, I can build up more and more thoughts and opinions, I can run polls on the channel, and finally it gives some time for that initial hype to die down, because if there's one thing that I'm starting to kind of think about more and realize more when it comes to thinking about video games is that there's obviously two different sides to the story. There's how the game made you feel while you were playing it, and that sort of final feeling once the credits are rolling. That to me is very valuable. That's why I try to have those like initial closing thoughts when the credits roll. And then there's also the game's kind of longer term feeling, the legacy it leaves behind, if you will. And it's still early days for Final Fantasy XVI, but it's already been about 3 months since I completed the game. So I've had plenty of time to generally just let things kind of calm down and settle down, chat to people, and just see like what aspects of the game are still lingering in my mind as positive and as negative. And that helps me form what I believe to be a more kind of fully formed opinion on the game. So in this video, I will be doing another kind of unscripted, Dansgo8 style, just kind of flow of consciousness review of the game. And let's see what comes to mind for me in terms of things that I liked and what I didn't like, and my overall feeling on the game. So it's going to be a long one, there's a lot to talk about, but when you've played like 60-70 hours playing through a game, I feel like it deserves as much kind of thought and detail as I can muster for these reviews. And so for me, staying away from like the hyper-scripted, like every single thing noted down and bullet pointed, to some degree it helps me kind of keep track of what's more important and lets things flow a little bit more naturally. So if there's aspects that I didn't talk about, there's a chance that I just don't really care about them as much as I thought I did. And so if you know everything down, it makes everything seem more important than it is, because I'm not a professional reviewer, I'm not doing it for a gaming publication, it's not a piece of academic writing. It's a lot more about how the game made you feel. And I think especially for people that follow my channel, they're more interested in my feelings and my thoughts and my emotions, as opposed to my very kind of, detailed and technical kind of approach to it, because I'm not a game developer. I don't play that many games, I don't review that many games, and so I don't think I offer as much value from that front. So let's start talking about Final Fantasy XVI and what I made of the entire experience. Now, I will begin by saying that upon completing the game, I recently edited the episode where I did my initial thoughts kind of thing, and I was very high on the game. And the Metacritic score for the game, I'm pretty sure now sits at 87. I think it was 88 originally. It slipped down to 87, which is obviously not a big deal. But I remember saying something along the lines of, that seems about on the money. Now, I would say that I've had more time to think about it and things have settled down a bit more. And that initial kind of just euphoria, hype, and just excitement from completing the game and the story has calmed down. I would say 87 all in, I think is a bit too high now. If I had to revise my score, I'd revise it down to, say, 84, 85, like nothing major. It's not like, oh, I had some time to think on it and I decided that the game's not good anymore. It's still a really good game, but I would say like longer term, I would say I dropped 2 or 3 points from the Metacritic score, which doesn't sound like very much, but it helps put things into a little more perspective for me, because when it comes to Metacritic scores, I care more about how it compares to other games as opposed to the raw score. And so once we start talking about like what other games have gotten and where I view the other games, then I think it starts to make more sense. So my general feeling was that this was my favorite Final Fantasy, the best Final Fantasy I've played since Final Fantasy X. And even on that initial review, I remember saying that Final Fantasy XII is the one where it's very close, very nip and tuck for which one I like more. I definitely like it more than 15, easily like it more than 15. I like it more than 13, but not by as much. I am a fan of 13, so I wouldn't say this game for me was like, oh, it was way better than 13. I liked it a bit more, but not by a huge amount. But 12 was the one that always was tough for me. I was like, to me, the things I like about them are quite different, and so it's very hard for me to decide which one I like more. And so for me, at least right now, as of this point, I probably put them basically equal for me. So about 85, like let's say if we're giving it like a raw score, I'd probably have to give both of them like an 85 in that sense. 12 more because of like the world and the questing style and the side material. There's just a general richness of the gameplay experience beyond the story. I just thought was so great, and it's for me, it's still basically the best in the franchise in that regard. It's really, really impressive, and because I'm someone that does value that stuff quite a lot too. Final Fantasy XII still, for me, that's why it's a really good game overall, despite not really loving the story that much. Now, for me, 16 is basically the flip side of that, where I really enjoyed the story, I really liked the cast and the relationships and the bonds they built together, and just experiencing those performances and those scenes and those emotions and all of that stuff. But when it comes to the world, like the non-kind of story and non-core boss battle or gameplay or big moment content, this game like fell flat for me. And so that's why they kind of complete each other in a way. And so despite having very different reasons, I would overall peg them about the same. And so before heading into like my extended thoughts on it, I would say that from my kind of initial feeling when I saw the credits roll, I have dropped like 2 or 3 more points. But I would say it's stabilized for me around like the 84, 85 mark. And it's on par basically with Final Fantasy XII as the best Final Fantasy game I've played since 10. Now, gun to my head, I'd probably still say 16, just by the absolute smidge, just like for technicality's sake to have to pick one, because still, I think all said and done, I do prefer the cast and the story more than the gameplay experience, and so for that reason, I think 16 still has to win it, but only just. And so for all intents and purposes, to me, I kind of view them about the same. With that kind of overall picture out of the way, let's start talking about things. As always, I'll talk about things that I liked more first, and then we'll talk about things that were more mixed for me, what I would have liked to have seen done differently, and things I just straight up did not like. So, for what I did like, I would say, as I've already mentioned, for me, the core reason I liked this game so much was because of the cast and the story. Now, I would say probably cast even more so than the story. I think the story was good. Like, it wasn't like one of the best stories. It was good. For me, the cast really sold it, and my mind keeps going back more towards how I felt nearer the end of the story. So at the start of the game, when we had like Sid around and stuff, it was a different kind of reason for enjoying it. Like the relationship that Clive and Sid had, the way they riffed off each other, the comedy, the charisma, the value that those two brought to the scenes that they were in and the moments that they were in, I thought were really excellent. So for the starting portion, where basically up until Sid dies, I really enjoyed it, but it was mostly just for like the charisma of Sid and generally the way the cast bounced off each other in that early part of the story. Then I felt like that stuff was lost. Once Sid died, for me, it never reached that height again. That was the peak when it comes to sort of the characters interacting with each other, especially not only just sort of in like a cutscene or something, but in general, I felt like Sid was the peak for that. Then the middle section of the story was a bit more up and down. Like there were moments of it where I felt more disconnected and the pacing felt a little bit off. And then there were moments of it where I was sucked right back in. So when we started to really make shit happen, like we'd go to a mother crystal and the stakes would get higher and we'd really start to get into the more serious part of it, I'd get hooked back in and it was really good to experience those parts. But some of the stuff in between, it was definitely a lot more mixed. I didn't really love it as much. The early part of the story, I guess, also didn't have side quests, so I think it helped to maintain a bit more momentum. There were no hunts. What side quests we did have, they were very small, they were very short, so it was much more kind of uninterrupted, getting to know Clive, getting to know Sid. The prologue was very strong to start with anyway, just, you know, the way that prologue ended, the final half an hour to 45 minutes was really epic. And so, yeah, I think strong start, middle was a bit more mixed, but then for me, what still sticks out was that by the time I got to the end of the story, I really did enjoy the cast, and I talked about it within the episodes themselves, but especially once I did the final set of quests with everybody, I just really felt that sort of family and friendship and that community connection. And to me, like, maybe that doesn't hit for everybody, but for me at least, that I really felt that connection, and it helped to make the finale of the game a lot stronger for me. Thinking of people like, say, Clive, Joshua, Jill, Torgal, of course, Torgal's my boy, Gav, Mid, Uncle Byron, who was hilarious. I love Byron. Dion, who had a hell of a story. Lady Karen, I have a soft spot for Lady Karen, like the old grumpy granny that also still has a soft spot for the people that she cares about. Then there's, of course, Tomes, who is my boy. I love Tomes. He was awesome. You know, still my favorite implementation of a lawsman in Final Fantasy. Like, as much as I love Machen, as I've said, Harpocrates is like the top tier of lawsman. He's awesome. I loved his voice. I loved his, like, just the warmth of his face. I just like talking to the guy. It's like a granddad I never had. And the way that they took him beyond just being someone that you kind of go to read books, the way that he was injected into the story, they really did seek his counsel and his guidance. And then we had his quest line with Dion, so you find out that he had a past with Dion and was his teacher. And all of those kind of things weaved in, I felt like it really helped to flesh him out as a character, and I was really glad to have him around as well. And finally, rest in peace to Cid, one of the most charismatic and coolest characters in Final Fantasy history, in my opinion. Absolutely awesome, and I do think like in the grand scheme, now that I've completed the game, I think they killed him off too soon. I wish we could have somehow, like, I don't know, got one more Mother Crystal or something before he died, or something like that. I would have loved it, but he was absolutely awesome. I really loved him, and the way that he was written, and his voice acting, his performance, all of it was just really excellent. And so, for me at least, I really just felt like the warmth and the family kind of vibe that the Hideaway had, and that really spoke to me. And that's not an easy thing to do, I think, in these games. And so that's why I do rate the characters and the story quite highly, because it does take a lot of work to form that kind of relationship within a game between the cast. So from that side of things, I really enjoyed it. And then, of course, we have like the more antagonistic figures and like the actual conflicts of the game, which I also thought was strong, because of course we had like the really hard-hitting prologue anyway to set things into motion. We had a very clear kind of setup and motivation for what Clive wants to do with the rest of the story. Then I thought like Annabella's character was awesome. Like, she was one of the best villains that I've seen for a while in these games, because I really hated her. Like, she was one of those characters where she was done so well that I was just I utterly hated her. And every scene she was in, like the facial expressions, the little kind of creases like near the top of her nose and stuff when she's talking, the way she kind of squints her eyes a little bit, the way she's manipulating people, I thought that really hit. Like, there was no one, like everyone watching and experiencing scenes with Annabella and her story, like I'm sure all of us basically felt the same. It was just really, really well done. And the conclusion of her story with Dion and all that stuff was really, really well done, in my opinion. I really appreciate that aspect too. And then, of course, we had Ultima. And what I liked about Ultima was that sometimes in these Final Fantasy games, you have this sort of thing of the main antagonistic force of the story kind of just jumps out at you right at the end. It's like you're kind of almost chasing shadows, or you're dealing with like these kind of manifestations of it, or these kind of entities that serve this greater power. And then right at the end, it's like, hey, here's this god thing that, you know, you just have maybe one speech before you start fighting, and then that's it, or even nothing. So, you know, Necron vibes. But for Ultima, I felt like he came into the story early enough, like there was clues about what was going on, and if you were willing to kind of investigate, read tomes, and look at that kind of stuff, you kind of could realize that it was Ultima before the game actually revealed him by name. And then, because we have, of course, like a physical, human kind of looking manifestation of the god, he got to kind of build his presence in the story. You got to see him, the strings that he was pulling, the things that he was doing, what he wanted for Clive, and by the end of it, I think he was very well defined. You could see what he wanted, why he wanted it, what his weaknesses were, what his strengths were, and so I felt like Ultima was also a good villain. And in general, for everybody involved, I thought the performances and the voice acting was absolutely top tier. Like, for me, I think it's pretty easily the best acted Final Fantasy ever. Now, there's not a massive sample size, because obviously so many of the games were pre-voice acting, but I would say, like, you know, Ben Starr as Clive was absolutely sensational, I think. You know, for the amount of stuff that he had to do in this game, he had to show a lot of range, a lot of like emotion, a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, hysteria, just so many things that he had to deal with, and I think he did an absolutely fantastic job. And it really helped just sell all of the rest of the situation. And so he was great as a leading man, in my opinion. Even like Ultima, I thought the tone of voice, the way that they kind of, you know, manipulated the sound of Ultima's voice, it sounded really, really cool and intimidating to me. Obviously, even characters like Gav, Gav is quite a central character, but he's basically an NPC, and he was fantastically voice acted. Joshua, again, excellent job, and well, Sid for the early part of the game. I love Sid. He was one of my favorite characters for a long time, and so in general, I think we just had a fantastic set of performances that really just helped to serve the story and the writing from the game. Just really good. And so all of those elements, I think they held up really strong. And in general, throughout the game, I did really enjoy it. The story for me, the reason why I say like it's good but it's not fantastic is also because of just personal preference. As I've mentioned, I'm not as big a fan of like these more politically oriented stories. Now, this wasn't like a really political kind of game or anything, but just when you have this whole like empire situation, there's multiple empires, and you have them sort of talking and plotting amongst themselves about what to do and which war to fight. You had like countless tomes and information about this war was fought, that war was fought, this empire took over this region, this empire did that, they formed an alliance here. Like that kind of stuff, it's just never interested me as much. And so those aspects of the story for me, they were just serviceable, mainly because of my own tastes. But I think, again, the way it sort of started to come together, especially in the second half, once obviously you started to destroy the mother crystals, and the world really started to go to shit. I mean, a lot of the empires just started to crumble, and it became a lot more about Ultima and basically the impending end of the world, and the remaining dominants trying to serve Ultima in crafting Clive into this vessel that Ultima could use to create basically a new world. And so once it started to segue towards that aspect of the story, I personally started to enjoy it more. And by the end of it, it really did feel like a quintessential Final Fantasy story, where it was about a god that on the one hand created humanity, but then ended up basically kind of shunning it and just became very isolated, alone. And the humans that were created as a result of this god developed their own will and a sense of community and love and friendship. And that's the kind of thing that a god will never be able to understand because they're so singular. And of course, the typical battle between, the human condition versus like the very lonely and isolated power of a god, and the way that eventually human will and love always prevails. Like that's a very common theme that we see in a lot of Final Fantasy games. And so for me, it really did come back to that by the end of the story. And so because it's something I'm familiar with, and it was done with a cast that I enjoyed and performances that were good and scenes that were well directed, for me, a lot of that stuff hit, and I really did enjoy myself throughout the story. When it comes to the writing, I felt like they did a nice job of generally having lines and a style that suited each character. So they really did feel like individuals. So when you hear, let's say, I don't know, Harpocrates talking versus Mid talking, the way that they were written did feel kind of authentic to them. And I did definitely appreciate that. The game had a lot of good one-liners. It really did. Just things that, especially when delivered with like good voice acting and that the scene is set right, the music's right, they really worked well. I mean, I always come back to the Otto line. For some reason, Otto's line just really surprised me when you finally find out his story, because he's quite just a standard, not particularly interesting character. He's just sort of, he gets shit done and he helps to run things around the hideaway. He's not that interesting. And so when we had that quest where he started to talk about his past with Sid and why they were so close and why they, worked together and became like brothers too, I found that really surprising, like the way he bared his soul and just talked about what Sid did for him and how that's when he realized that's a man he'd go to the ends of the earth for. It just felt very powerful to me, the way he delivered that line and the way that they wrote that for him, the way he opened up and basically kind of almost confessed to something like that. That's not the kind of thing that I would say is easy for someone to say unless they're really trying to share something quite deep and personal with you. So yeah, just things like that I thought were really cool. And of course, some of the one-liners, the way that Clive can sort of give it back to the antagonist. So the antagonist will say something sort of particularly kind of powerful and grandiose, and then Clive will give it right back to him and not let them get away with it. I thought that was always cool. The banter between him and Sid, like that banter, I think died out a bit too quickly, and no other pairing in the game could reach those levels. But the early banter between Sid and Clive, I thought was really fun and well written as well. So in general, I think the writing in the game was strong as well. Now, moving on from there, I would say the other kind of biggest aspect that probably still stuck out to me would be, I still call them basically the big moments of the game. So I would say like the half an hour before you get to like a mother crystal, or before like a pivotal story point happens, to the aftermath of that. those segments, so that it maybe makes up about 20% of the game, I would say. Those sections were really strong for me. So as soon as it became the case, okay, we've entered this city and we're on our way to destroy a Mother Crystal, from that segment onwards, things really ramped up. And once you do get to a Mother Crystal, like the boss battles that you have there, the Eikon battles, the adrenaline, like the Eikon battles in this game, some of them at least, they achieved things that I just didn't think were possible for a Final Fantasy game. Like, it absolutely blew my mind. And that's something that will definitely stick with me because it's just so unique. Of course, for me, it started mostly with the Titan battle, where I always think to myself, how do you fight something that big in a realistic way that kind of looks cool and just doesn't look silly? Because Titan is just so huge that it just doesn't look like realistically you could just kind of punch it and anything's going to happen to it. It's just too big. But the way that they choreographed that fight and the hype that they generated, I just felt like I was playing a different game, but like in a good way, because it just did something that I've never experienced before. And so the Titan battle, like the music for that, the spectacle, just the way that those scenes were choreographed, everything I thought was just absolutely awesome. And then, of course, I just remember thinking, okay, they've done this insane battle for Titan, and it makes sense for Titan because of, like I say, the sheer size of the thing. And I was like, well, for Bahamut, they might have to go for a different approach here because, I mean, how can they one-up what they've done here? Because that was such an adrenaline rush for such a long time. It was just like, well, where do you even go from here? And then for Bahamut, they went absolutely ballistic, and it took it to a height, again, I just didn't think would be possible. And just that whole, like, Titan battle and Bahamut battle in that sense were just absolutely mind-blowing for me. And what they managed to achieve with those, I thought was really special, because it was really bold to try and do battles of that scale without it just feeling like, I don't know, they tried too hard or was just overworked, or the voice acting could have got a bit cringe because they have to reach such a kind of crazy power level to really sell what's going on in the scene, like all of that kind of stuff. There is a chance they could have messed up by going that big on those boss battles, but it really worked, man. And again, the conversations that I had with people, I think everyone really appreciated and enjoyed like the scale and the ambition of those boss battles. They were really just like adrenaline rush for sure. So those parts of the game were great, and they were often accompanied by great scenes before them and after them as well. So those like big parts of the story, once the momentum started to move along and we started to get to the serious parts of the game, that was when it really shone. And some of those segments were basically some of the best I played in any Final Fantasy game. So yeah, definitely one of the things that stuck with me. And I would say that beyond that, when it comes to more of like the gameplay in the world, I think, and I would say beyond that, when it comes to more like presentation and gameplay type stuff, I think they generally provided quite a structured experience for the player, and the way that you could sort of traverse around the world felt good to me. Having the hideaway as a hub where you could go and you could kind of chat to people, you could pick up quests, you could buy stuff, you could brush up on the lore, you could just basically take a moment to just chill like in between the story. I thought that was pretty nice. And in general, I would say like the gameplay experience overall was just smooth, and I felt like they made the game in a way that helped to primarily serve the storytelling and the progression and the sort of the feeling of Clive continuing to gain more power as he progresses through. Because one thing I definitely feel was the case was that the game was a bit too easy, and I hear this comment a lot, and it's definitely not just me, but I also hear a lot of debate about it as well. And I'm definitely one of those people that falls into that I think this game was too easy camp, but I also definitely see the other side of it, and I actually praise sometimes the fact that it's easier, because I think what this game did achieve was that for me, just because the game was easier doesn't mean that it wasn't fun, and I found the gameplay of the game fun. I did enjoy it, and when it comes to, especially once again in those bigger moments, I felt like the gameplay really shone, because the gameplay is more action oriented, it's reactionary, it's more spectacle, and that really shines when you have the bigger boss battles. Like the adrenaline goes up and you really feel like you're this super powerful badass that's like going up against, you know, these colossally powerful Eikons and trying to best them. And so those kind of moments were great, and especially in the gameplay and like the smaller bosses and stuff, I feel like having the game be on the easier end was just a nice way to keep the momentum going, and especially help players that aren't as action oriented, because for me at least it is quite a big departure from what we know from the Final Fantasy experience, and it is way more reliant on like the precision dodge, for example, than any other game in the past. Like Yes, there are Final Fantasy games that have had dodging mechanics and stuff previously, but I don't think it was ever as core to winning and making progress as it was in this game. And so the fact that they made it a bit easier and more accessible for people of all skill levels, I would say, was a good idea for the story. And I'll come to the aspects which I didn't like about that later. But I do think it served the story well, and it kept the momentum going. There was a reduced chance of you getting stuck on something and losing momentum or getting frustrated or anything like that. And so for that reason, I would say both for how good it makes you feel when the battles are going well, and for generally being an aid in helping to keep the story momentum going, I think that the way that they presented the gameplay and the progression I thought was actually quite good. Now, is it my personally preferred best style? It's not, but I will go into that later, but I do think it does deserve some praise for the way that it was presented on that front. Because if you had a different type of system, I just don't think, let's say, a battle like Titan or a battle like Bahamut or some of the more intermediate bosses, they just wouldn't have felt as fun and as satisfying if you had a different battle system. So I think they went for an approach that most people would either say was just like, it was decent and it helped to, like, it wasn't like a massive plus for the game, but it helped me just continue to play. It was generally fun, I enjoyed it, it was okay, but it wasn't one of my favorite aspects, which is basically someone like me, ranging all the way to, man, the combat was super fun. It was really, really good. I loved kind of all the different combos and trying out all the different icons and doing all of this stuff. And it was really dynamic and alive, and I really enjoyed the gameplay. It was awesome. I think the people that really didn't enjoy the gameplay at all, I think there's such a fundamental disconnect between the way they want to enjoy Final Fantasy versus what this game was trying to provide, that there was nothing they could have done, I think, to make that work. Like, if you have a more action-oriented system in which you do have to rely on dodging more and, like, you know, weapon combination, like icon combinations, all of that kind of stuff, I don't think there's a way they could have presented all of that would have ever pleased those people. What they did with this, with like the timely accessories being available and the general difficulty curve being quite shallow, I felt like it was probably one of the best kind of ways that they could do it to probably please the most people, or at least, you know, frustrate the least amount of people, I think. And so I can definitely understand the approach from that point of view. So in terms of the world and the way it looked and the way it played and the way it sounded, I would say overall, from like a technical standpoint, the way the game looked and the way it was presented, I thought was really nice. I mean, the general quality of the graphics, the animations, the environments, I thought was definitely very strong. And it did feel like, you know, PS5 gen, it feels like it belongs here. Clearly a lot of work went into it. And so I have, like, you know, I have only praise for the way the game looked. The world in general, it did have its nicer areas and it did have some variety, but I wouldn't say it's on my list of positives, so I'll talk a bit more about that on the negative side, the side I didn't enjoy as much. But what we did get, I definitely did enjoy visually, especially once we started to get into the more like interesting areas like the cities and the bigger towns and stuff. I did think like it started to shine a bit more. But in terms of the literal quality of what we got and the reliability of the gameplay, like the frame rate held up pretty much like 99% of the game. I felt like the frame rate was on point, looked good, played smoothly. I didn't really have any like technical glitches or hitches or anything really weird going on. The only thing that happened was my PS5 overheated, but that was kind of on me. And I played it at launch, so especially in this day and age, a lot of us know that playing a game on launch day is always a little bit risky. Like, there's always games that come out that are not polished like that AAA standard that they should be at, and they need like a bunch of patches to set things right and this, that, and the other. Final Fantasy, I think, on that front was very successful at launch, and I think that's worth its weight in gold too, because you're paying like 60, 70 quid for a game, and you don't want to be dealing with bullshit. You don't want an incomplete game. For me, this was a complete game. They told a complete story that had like a complete ending. We saw what happened to the protagonist, and for me at least, it happened in a satisfying way. In general, I think the quality of the production and the way the game runs and looks at launch, I think, is also something positive and something that I was impressed by, especially since it was preceded by 15 in terms of the mainline releases. Now, 15 is a bit of an anomaly on that front because of all of its developmental issues and whatnot, but hey, at the end of the day, you just don't know. I mean, just because 15 had a really rough development cycle doesn't mean that 16 was automatically going to be fine. 16's could have been bad too, but it wasn't, and we got a nice high quality release at launch, which is important. So that side of things was cool. The soundtrack is one of those where it's a positive, but it's not, again, it's not like a big positive. If I'm being totally honest, I did expect a little bit more. Soken and his work on 14 has just been talked about so much, and I've heard some tracks from 14, even though I've never played it, and I really enjoyed it. And so I did have really high hopes, because he's become like the new rock star of like Final Fantasy music, and that's why my expectations were set very high. And I don't think, for me at least, I don't think it delivered on that front. Now, obviously that doesn't mean it was a bad soundtrack or it wasn't even good. Like, it was a really good soundtrack, but as I always say, the standard is so damn high for Final Fantasy games that if your soundtrack is good, it's average. Like, in that sense, they're all good. Like, for me, there's no such thing as like a mediocre Final Fantasy sound. It just doesn't exist. They're all great. And so if you want to stand out, and for me at least, if you want to go down as having like a really great soundtrack, you got to give something a bit extra. Now, I don't know enough about music to tell you what that is, but I can just tell you how I feel about it. For me at least, again, going back to previous games, this game's soundtrack made me think of Final Fantasy 13 and just how damn good Final Fantasy 13 soundtrack was. Like, Final Fantasy 13 is an example of the game wasn't awesome, but the soundtrack was so good that, for me at least, it stood the test of time, and it shone among the rest of the game as well. And Hamauzu, anyone that follows the channel knows I just love his work on 10 as well. Everything that he collaborated with Uematsu on for 10 are some of the best tracks of the entire game, and 13 is his baby, and 13 for me it punches above its weight and has one of the best soundtracks in the series, in my opinion. And so it's not, for me, like, the soundtrack of 16 is not as good as 13's, and so I wouldn't put it in, say, like the top 5 best Final Fantasy soundtracks. And so yeah, it didn't hit those heights. I think for me, it felt like the soundtrack was a bit more in service of the storytelling. Now, that's going to sound like, well, you said a good thing, but it's hard to explain for me. Again, I don't have enough of a meaningful understanding of music and composition and stuff to really convey my thoughts properly. But it felt to me like the focus was on making sure the music fitted what they tried to achieve within a given scene or within a given moment. And so, like, let's say you have a cutscene and something important is happening, like, the music fits the scene really well, and it's really good, like, filmmaking music. But sometimes I feel like Final Fantasy or these kind of games, they can shine where they just make a good, memorable track for something, for like a particular location, for example, or a particular sort of moment, or something quirky, or just something like that. Like, the location music for me, for example, just wasn't as strong as some of the Final Fantasies from the past. Like, there wasn't a single track where I went into an area and I felt the same thing that I felt, let's say, when you go to Erba in Final Fantasy 13 and Dust to Dust starts playing. Like, it just, nothing hit that height for me. Or let's say Final Fantasy 7 when you go into Cosmo Canyon and the Cosmo Canyon music starts playing. Like, those are kind of those iconic soundtrack moments that, for me at least, that I remember. The battle music I thought was really nice. Like, the music for Titan Lost and stuff was epic. But the battles themselves are so big and so grandiose that, for me at least, it gets harder to focus on the music. Like, you kind of acknowledge that it's there and you're like, yeah, like, this music sounds good, it helps get the adrenaline pumping. But the older games, I think they have a benefit of, as a visual spectacle and in terms of how engaged you have to be with your controller while playing, it's not as intense. And so you have a bit more kind of, for me at least, I have a bit more, I guess, kind of capacity to appreciate the soundtrack as well. Like, literally, if I'm playing a game like Final Fantasy VI and I'm going to fight Kefka and Dancing Mad begins, I can literally just, if I'm on wait mode, I can just stop playing and I can just appreciate the soundtrack. Like, I'm fighting Gilgamesh and it's like Battle of the Big Bridge, I can just enjoy the soundtrack. For this one, you have to be like on the ball. You have to be like, getting ready to dodge, have a look at your cooldown. Is it complete? Can I use the move? And then obviously you're using attack in the meantime, and like everything's just happening. Like, there's sparks flying, flames, explosions, all that kind of shit. And throughout that, trying to enjoy the soundtrack at the same time, it's just, for me at least, it's just not as easy. And so for those kinds of reasons, like, the soundtrack was good. There were definitely tracks I liked. Like, when I'm walking around, they fit the area well, I'm enjoying it. But there wasn't anything too standout for me personally. And so that's why I wouldn't put it as like a strong positive and like, oh, I really love the soundtrack. It was good, it was fine, it was nice. But I have had like a few people say that his work on 14 is superior. But obviously I'll leave that to people that have played both, that have a solid kind of foundation of both, and they can kind of make their own minds up. But I have heard a few people say that his work on 14 is a bit superior to this one. So does that mean like I wouldn't want Soken doing the music for the next game? Not at all. Like I'm happy for him to continue, but I will be expecting a little bit more personally for Final Fantasy 17 if he is the kind of lead composer on 17. So that's just how I feel. And well, it wouldn't be right if I mentioned the soundtrack and didn't talk about the fact that it doesn't have a Chocobo theme. That legitimately like upset me. Okay, I get it. You're trying to, you know, have a different concept, tell a different story, have a different vibe, but there's Chocobos in the game. There's quests about Chocobos. We have a Chocobo that we love dearly, and we ride Chocobos a lot in the game. Why the hell would you not put a Chocobo theme in a Final Fantasy game? Like, for me, that's the kind of thing that's just like, it actually makes no sense. It literally makes no sense. There's got to be some way you could have worked one in, and every single, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but surely every single Final Fantasy, like mainline Final Fantasy numbered game that has a Chocobo in it has some kind of Chocobo theme in the game. Surely, let's say, depending on the area of the game that you're in, maybe if you're doing a side quest, maybe you can only just use it once, like in a side quest related to the Chocobo, and you have a more wholesome moment. I don't know, like the fact that they couldn't find a way to put it in or didn't want to me was just wrong, and I did not like that, because a part of Final Fantasy music nowadays is of course about nostalgia. Final Fantasy 14 players I think understand that well, because there's a lot of bosses and a lot of stuff that they would know from previous entries that have been reworked, and their themes have been reworked, rearranged, all that kind of stuff. And part of the reason you love them so much is because of the nostalgia factor of the originals. So how on earth we don't have a Chocobo theme in this game, to me it's a nonsense, and it's something that I genuinely wasn't happy about. So it definitely doesn't get anywhere near like the top 3 to 5 soundtracks in Final Fantasy history for me. Music, again, so subjective that it probably ranges from people who feel like what I felt to like, oh, it's one of the top 3 soundtracks of the entire franchise. But I don't know, for me, it's not. So when it comes to the more positive things, I think that's generally what I have to say. There's definitely a lot there. I mean, I've already been talking for quite some time. There's definitely a lot of positives I took from this game. And the stuff that I mentioned, it does count for a lot. So in terms of if we're making a bullet point list, I might literally have 3 times as many negative things as positive things. But overall, the positive things, like the individual weight of each thing, is probably higher than the negatives, and that's why I would still give this game like a strong score overall, because some of the earlier things I mentioned, like the cast and the characters and going on that journey with them, like even something as simple as the Torgal quest near the end, that was so powerful for me and so meaningful for me that like it makes me forget about a lot of the bad stuff. Like what I enjoyed in that moment, it just really appeals to me. And so I do have a lot of positive feelings about this game, for sure. Now, let's talk about the negatives, because there's a lot of those as well in this game, and it's really interesting. It's one of those games where, having talked to people, I would say maybe 90% of the time, just like roughly, when people tell me what they don't like about the game, I'm like, yeah, either I agree with you or I understand why you don't like it. Like it's one of those games, and it's kind of almost crazy to me that overall the sentiment of the game is still so strong. So to give you guys some more perspective, I've done polls on the channel that have had thousands of people responding to it, and the overwhelming majority have said that they either think this is a really great game or it's like an absolutely excellent game and is turned into one of their favorite Final Fantasies. Like I would say like a large percentage of people fall within that group, and I'll share some screenshots of those polls so you can see for yourself. So it's not just me, it's thousands of people that are Final Fantasy fans, clearly, because they're taking a poll on my channel. That's how they feel about it. So I think that's also kind of worth its weight in gold. But the sheer amount of criticisms that people have for this game, even people that liked it like me, is probably more than some of the other Final Fantasies in the series that are maybe even less liked. I don't know, it's weird. So let's talk about some of them, because this could take a while. I'll try to generally follow the same talking points as what I started with the positives. So I talked more about story and characters first. When it comes to story and the characters, I think the story-wise, like the middle portion, I found weaker, and it did go a bit off track sometimes. The 5-year time skip I personally didn't like. I felt like it was too long considering what happened afterwards, which was kind of essentially nothing. Clive was trying to figure out how to prime into Ifrit, and it had been 5 years and he'd made no progress. His relationship with Jill, I just wasn't that big a fan of. Like, to me, it doesn't go down as one of the best kind of romantic relationships in Final Fantasy. I just wasn't that big a fan of it. Like, it's been 5 years. He's in his early 30s, I think, by that time, or like something like that, or like late 20s. And they've been basically together in each other's proximity constantly for that whole time. And they still have this whole, like, you know, slightly awkward, like, oh, you know, we can't let anyone know that we like each other. Oh, oops, our hands touched. And it's like, come on, man, it's been 5 years and you've had nothing to do. You've not made any progress on the mother crystals. You've not learned how to prime. You've kind of done shit all. And you can barely touch hands. And like, that kind of stuff, given that this game's trying to be more mature, is trying to be more adult, literally in like the opening scene of one of the opening scenes of the game, you got Benedicta and Hugo just kind of having a lustful moment. Like, it's that kind of game. It's a little bit more raunchy, a bit more sexy. So come on, man, like your protagonists are allowed to be a bit horny too. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's fine. So like the 5-year time skip and the stuff around that, I don't think was that well done. Wasn't too big a fan of that. And I think there were just times in the story where they would give you kind of quests and things to do that were main story stuff that just really felt like side material. And that really came to a head when I got to I think it was Boklad, and we had like Goots loses his pass and all of that stuff. I was just like, what is this? Like this just completely looks like this could have been reworked as a side quest very easily, and they could have just chosen to make that optional and go on with the story. And so, like, there were those moments that didn't work as well. I think Hugo's arc disappointed me a bit in the end. Like, he seemed like such a badass character at the start. Like, you know, the way he was, like, running that room, like, early on, he was so, like, confident and, like, knowledgeable and, like a badass. And, like, he really kind of, he was very intimidating. And then afterwards, it kind of just, after Benedicta, it just turned into him just constantly wailing about Benedicta, basically, until the end. There was kind of nothing more to him after that. And I was like, come on, man, like, okay, like, you know, you guys are in a lustful relationship, let's say, because Benedicta's obviously up to other things too at the same time. But like his whole character just kind of devolved into him shouting and screaming about Benedicta until he died. So I felt like that was he went out with a bit of a whimper. So I wasn't too happy with how they dealt with Hugo in like the second part of his story, let's say. And so yeah, that wasn't that great either. And so, like, those kind of aspects of the story I didn't love so much. There were, like, times where I started to get a bit confused about the whole, like, priming and semi-priming. And, you know, they give the essence, like, they give their essence to Clive, or Clive takes it. And then they could still basically just prime into the Eikon anyway. So I'm like, well, what's the point? And I guess you could argue it's like, oh, you know, that's their sheer force of will. And they don't have control of it. Maybe the essence is what helps them keep control of the Eikon. But it's like, to me, it was a bit like, well, if you can just transform into him anyway, I don't know, it just lost a bit of its kind of thing for me. It kind of feels a bit pointless, because, like, especially Dion at the end, he didn't lose control of Bahamut. He kind of lost it, and then he got it back, and it's just like, oh, okay, he can just get back the power of the Eikon whenever he wants. Like, doesn't the Eikon have anything to say about this? Like, Bahamut himself, or whatever godly entity represents Bahamut? I don't know, like, that was a bit wishy-washy for me. I didn't like that as much, I would say. And still, I think, in hindsight, I would say that Sid kind of left the story a bit too early for me. He was such a strong character compared to, like, the rest of the cast members, that I think he deserved a bit more time in the story. But I will say, again, just to briefly flip back to the positive, I really think one of the things that they really got right was that Clive filled Sid's shoes, I think, in the best way that they could reasonably do it. Because obviously Clive should be his own man. He shouldn't try to suddenly be Sid and use the same type of jokes and the same type of lines. That would have just been silly. But the way that he did fill his shoes and he did become a great leader, he became someone that understood people's problems and developed strong bonds. And to me, at least, like, as a leader, he was a great successor to Sid, and he didn't make me miss him as a leader. I just missed Sid from, like, a more personal level, like his banter, his general presence, his jokes. There was just no one like him in the game. For the rest of it. But they definitely avoided the issue that I have with Final Fantasy V, where Galuf, to me, is like a kind of the Sid of that game. And spoilers for Final Fantasy V, he dies at roughly the midpoint of the story, and the protagonist, Bartz, for me, is just nowhere near good enough to carry the story as the leading character after Galuf dies. So in the first half, even though Bartz wasn't that great, together with Galuf and the rest of the cast, that, like, it elevated the level of the whole thing. But once Galuf was gone, and the character that Galuf was replaced by plus Bart's in general. Like, for me, it just wasn't enough, and the story took a hit. But that didn't happen for 16. So I do miss Sid, and I do wish he was in the story more. But I think they did a really nice job with making Clive like the spiritual and kind of almost talismanic successor to Sid in the Hideaway. So I thought that was really cool. So in terms of story stuff, there's that. I think they wasted a bit too much time on bearers, I think, in the end. I did find myself saying, like, towards the end of the game especially, it was like, there's just too much focus on how shit things are for the bearers. And I'm like, you've explained that to us countless times throughout the story, and we get it. And obviously part of what Sid wants to achieve is a world where bearers can be free and, like, not persecuted for what they are and all that kind of stuff. Like, they sold that to me within, like, the first 20-30 hours of the game, and then they just still kept having, like, quests related to it and quests related to it and quests related to it, and I'm just like, I can't feel any more sympathy for the bearers. Like, I get it, it sucks, but especially near the second half of the game, it's like, okay, but we've got our major kind of goal now to kind of save the world, so stop focusing on the bearers all the time. Like, I get it. So for me, I think the bearers were a bit overbearing by the end, so that's one thing that also I wasn't as big a fan of in the story. So those are some of the things that stick out to me. From here, I will talk about characters. Overall, I would say the characters were definitely really strong. The only one that stood out to me as worth commenting on is Jill. Jill disappointed me, I would say, because I really liked her. Like, seeing that childhood Jill at the start of the game and the way that she grows up and she becomes like this strong ally for Clive, and you know what she goes through as a dominant of Shiva and all of this kind of stuff, I found her story really compelling. And she had this really, like, she was graceful and kind of soft-spoken, but when the time came, she could turn into Shiva and become this incredible, like, destructive force, and that to me made her very compelling. But the way that they kind of handled her story, I felt like she was way too much of a passenger. It was too much of a, like, Clive is the star of the show, and he does everything. You know, when it comes to fighting time, like, I think when we got to the area with Liquid Flame and stuff, and like the Mother Crystal there, Shiva kind of tried to make an impact, but then couldn't, and then Clive had to go and sort of finish the job. So she got, like, her revenge on Imran, I think, or she kind of partially did, and then Clive had to finish the job, and she was just too much of a passenger for most of the game, where she could have been utilized in a much stronger way, I feel. And in the end, she literally basically just had to give up her essence to Clive anyway, because Clive is the man and he has to do everything. And so I was a bit disappointed. Jill could have definitely done a lot more, and I would have liked to have seen more from Jill, especially as someone who's literally present. She's in the prologue, and she's there almost from the start, like, and throughout the entire game. And I'm just like, I expected to be able to do more with her, like more of an impact in the side quests, more side quests where she takes the lead. She has more to say, she has more to do. You know, maybe not just the Imran quest, or when you do the Imran quest or do something like that, have her basically tell Clive to take a back seat. Maybe we can control Shiva for one fight or something, like, you know. So I do feel like there was more that could have been done with her, and that's one area where I do hope that there's DLC. I really wouldn't mind a Jill DLC, like playable Shiva, explore more of her story, more of her past, something like that. I think that would be super cool. So I think Jill was one of the areas that fell flat for me in terms of characters. But I would say for, like, the rest of it, characters wise, I don't have too much of a gripe. I think Hugo and the way that his kind of character ended, like his story, and Jill, I think they were probably two of the kind of more standout ones that I think could have been done better. But I'm not going to talk about the characters too much, because I think overall they were very strong and one of my favorite aspects of the game. Now let's talk about side quests. Side quests is a very mixed bag, and I think because they were backloaded, and a lot of my favorite quests were like the final third of the quests. Again, I had a bit of a recency bias where I finished the game and I was like, yeah, the quests were good. But again, retrospectively, thinking more about the side quests as a whole and having a bit more time to think on it, to talk to people and that kind of thing, I would still say the side quests are decent. I wouldn't give them the good tag. I would say they were like if a good tag is like 7 out of 10, I'd give it like a 6.5. 6.5, 6.8, like, it's close to good. Like, it's definitely, for me, they weren't bad. I wouldn't say the side quests sucked or anything like that, but I wouldn't say that overall, like, when you consider all of the side quests that you can do, I wouldn't put them in like the good or like the really good category at all. And the reason for that is because I have to include like the hunts and stuff together with the side quests. I'm grouping them all together, and so for me, like, the side questing kind of started a bit late anyway. The hunts didn't come into it for a while either. And then once they did begin, of course, there was just a lot of these kind of very basic, simple kind of quests. And even if I do understand the kind of point behind them sometimes, there was just, as a ratio, there were too many of them, and there were lots of things they could have explored, which they didn't. And so a lot of the, especially the earlier quests, to me, they just felt like too many of them were just throwaway quests, in my opinion. When I say there's more they could have explored, there was one weird kind of brief moment in the game where the side quests, for me at least, even though in general the side quests weren't doing that well at the time, two quests in particular stood out to me where the game came alive and it intrigued me in terms of side quests. And that was when we had the really weird, like, unsettling music in the area with, like, the grasslands. I forget where it was. It was beyond Northreach, I think. And it was the two quests where one is like you had like this the dog situation, like the wolves or the dogs or something. Basically, the bearers were being fed to them for entertainment or something crazy like that. And then there was the one where the girl talks about a pet, I think. Again, it's been like over 3 months since I played these quests now, and well, even since I edited them, it's been a long time. But she talks about a pet, I think, and then you realise she's talking about a human being, she's talking about a bearer. And those quests were like back to back almost. And I was like, holy shit, like that's messed up. But at the end of the day, again, this is a mature game. Like, there's some serious shit going on. Like, these bearers are slaves. Like, they're living absolutely horrific lives. This is a mature story. There's death going on. There's, like, you know, there's persecution. There's violence. There's all of this kind of stuff. I did want to see more quests like that, because that's the part of the world. It's world building. You have to understand what these people are going through. And so instead of, like, you know, those were unique perspectives on that, because there was a lot of just telling us that they're having a bad time, or you go somewhere and it's like, oh, these bearers have been killed. For me to see like those two like different ways in which they were treated just like animals, like that, to me, I found it was morbid, but it was fascinating, and to me it helped to build the story and build the world. So I wanted more of that kind of quest. It was too much about, like, you know, too many side quests were like, oh, go speak to this person for like 4 minutes straight. And again, as someone who edited the entire playthrough, this is something I got to see a lot firsthand. Sometimes the quest had so much dialogue, and it was dialogue from characters that just aren't that important in the story. Like, the quest isn't that important, and the person giving it is not that important. And so literally throughout the entire quest, there's sometimes like 6 or 7 minutes where you're listening to this NPC just talk. And for me, it was just too much. And I had multiple people that said, I'm not going to lie, I started to skip some of the dialogue for some of those kind of things. Now, due to the nature of what I do and how I present the videos, and I try to never skip dialogue, it's just not something I do. But there were times where I was really kind of switching off from the dialogue. They just put too many words, too many lines for characters and quests that didn't deserve it, and it really dragged out some of those quests. I had episodes where it was like half an hour long. It was side quest oriented, and I spent maybe less than 5 minutes talking, and most of the side quests were like not that important in terms of like what you had to do or who they were. So that, too many side quests were just like, you know, especially near the end of the game, there's a Akashic, you have to go fight them. There's an Akashic outbreak, there's an Akashic outbreak. The one quest where someone that we actually kind of started to care about became an Akashic, again, that was interesting. And so the ratio of quests like that I felt was too low. And that's something that I think Nier Automata, for example, did really well. Nier Automata had a lot of quests, but I think they had a lot more twists and turns in their material, and it's a bit more dark and morbid. Now, obviously, this game doesn't have to be that much, but I felt like that's one way they could have improved the quests. Like, have less of them, have a bit more snappier dialogue, especially for characters that I don't think are that important, or quests that aren't that important. And then have a few more quests that show the darker sides, that end in like a bittersweet way, end in a tragic way, and that show us, you know, what this world is truly about. So yeah, the side quests for me, like especially like the final phase, because I did like the cast so much, and the final quests were very much like cast oriented, of course, and you know, forming those final bonds, having that last adventure with everyone and that kind of thing. Obviously I like that, so those were nice, but overall I have to say the side quests were like decent. I didn't end up not enjoying them, but I would say that it definitely wasn't like, oh, really good side quests, so they were great. So that's what I would say about the side quests themselves. The hunts were okay. They were like, they're not, I wouldn't even say decent category, they were okay. I was excited. That was one of the things I was most excited about in this game, I'll be honest, because I'm such a fiend for, you know, doing that type of side material. And I talked earlier about difficulty, and this is where I'm going to circle back to that. I talked about the positive aspect of making the game a bit easier and more accessible. Now, the negative side for me comes in a lot of the non-story material. I will say that gameplay-wise, they should have made it a bit more difficult as you got nearer the end. Like the final third, I think, could have been a bit harder. Yes, I did die once, I think, against... I think it was the first Ultima fight, or Odin, or one of the two. So I died like once, but I mean, even that, it felt like a bit of a freak incident. It wasn't like I got overpowered and I sucked. It was just like, yeah, okay, fine, let's just do it again, and I won second time. Especially as you get nearer the end, I think they could have upped the ante a bit more. But for the story, at least, I'm not going to rag too much on the difficulty. I think, honestly, it was fine. It's not worth, like, you know, majorly criticizing or anything. Where I have a problem is more to do with the side content and the difficulty of the side content. For me, hunts, they're inherently just side material. You can complete the story and you can experience everything you want to experience in the game in terms of story without having to do any hunts. And so, therefore, if you have hunts and you have a tier system for hunts, surely your A rank and your S rank hunts have to be difficult. Like, they have to be. Like, otherwise, what's the point? Unless you have more of a just, I purely do this for the completionism, so that I can see a trophy pop, and if every single hunt was really easy, I just don't care, because I just want the trophy for doing all the hunts, then fair play to you. But for me, like, the whole point of hunts that are high rank is that I'm supposed to feel some kind of challenge and, like, you know, thrill or exhilaration from having completed them. It should feel like I've achieved something. And the only hunt, basically, where I think that was a thing was Svarog, the level 50 dragon that, for some reason, they made available when you were much lower level. And then all the S-rank hunts after the level 50 were not level 50, which I found baffling. And so the game, for me at least, it basically had one really good hunt, and that was it, out of like 32 or something. So for that kind of optional material, I think they were a bit too afraid to make them more difficult. They should have maybe had a bit more of a level kind of scaling system. I don't know. Basically, as long as you're doing side quests and you're generally interacting with the world and the material, your level ends up being too high. And so most stuff becomes easy. And then even when the level of things is above yours, it kind of becomes a bit more grindy than difficult. It just takes longer. So, I don't know, I don't think their hunts were on point. I would have loved to have seen some more difficult material. Some more stuff like Svarog, I think that would have been nice. I know there's a level 50 level cap, but maybe they should have found a way to scale it a little bit more. Then they should have been a way to, like, you know, an A rank hunt should always be 5 levels higher than you, and an S rank hunt should always be 10 levels higher than you. I don't see the problem with that personally, but they opted for like a flat level system, and I don't think that worked as well for it. Another thing I would say is that for me, the bestiary wasn't big enough, and this is something that I haven't heard from as many people, but when I mention it to people, they kind of think on it, and they're like, yeah, I think you're right, actually. Like, that's not something I've really thought of that much, but yeah, I think so. And for me, at least, that also shows in the hunts. I think another reason why the hunts are not as numerous is because there's just literally not that many enemies to fight in a hunt. There's only so many times that they can make you fight a behemoth or something. And so, again, I think because so much of the effort and the production time and budget was put into that big 20% of the game, everything else, I felt like it suffered a little bit. Now, Final Fantasy, of course, is always synonymous with having, let's say, a wolf enemy that's reskinned 6 times throughout the game. Like, that's not necessarily the issue. But for a game of this ambition and like this scale, and that wants to offer things like hunts as a side questing tool, I think they needed like maybe 5 or 10 different enemies that weren't in the game, that could have been maybe more used in hunts, higher level material, that kind of stuff. So like, let's say when you go into, there's like the Velcroy Desert, for example, and there's the bigger area that's a bit more kind of grassland. There's bigger expanses that don't contain any bigger enemies, really. Again, my mind goes to Final Fantasy 13 and Grand Pulse and how awesome it was to just run around there for me. Like those Adamantoises and the smaller ones just roaming around and stuff like that. I thought that was amazing. The big like Ochu enemies, stuff like that. There was just like, in this game, there was barely any of it. The Adamantoise was just like, you know, the same size as everything. It was smaller than a lot of the bigger enemies in the game. It was just like, it doesn't have to be big, but there were just no enemies there that had any real physical presence other than the big boss battles. And so I think for me, that's another area where they kind of dropped the ball. And hunts, like they could have, if they had like 10 or 15 different enemies that we get to fight throughout the game, I think they could have expanded their hunts out more too. And it would just given us more options. Because the bigger enemies we do get, I thought they were really good. So like when you fight, let's say, Svarog, it's a real like visual spectacle. Even though it's like basically it's a mini boss, it's not a story boss. The dragons and stuff, the moves that they have, you know, the area of effect attacks that they have look really cool. I thought like the battles themselves were awesome, but in general they just didn't really have enough of those, I think, at that scale. And so it would have been nice to just have a dragon of Svarog scale just sitting in the middle of the Velcroy desert and you can just go fight it. Like have a few enemies like that, for example. I think it could have made a difference. I do think that the bestiary size being small did hurt the game, and it hurt the hunts as well, so that's one thing I would have loved to have seen be improved. So that's why overall I think with the questing, like the more kind of literal side quests, I wasn't, like they were decent, but I wasn't that high on them. The hunts were mediocre, and they had basically no optional region or dungeon or cave or something like that that contained very high level enemies that you could fight against. So that for me would have been, if that kind of stuff was on point, like if the hunts were better and we had a slightly greater variety of enemies, especially on the higher end of the scale, and we had like an optional dungeon or two just to kind of test our mettle against some tougher stuff more regularly, then I would have said the game being easy for the story, to me, it doesn't matter, because if you're looking for a challenge, then you can do that stuff anyway. Their approach being that that's okay, you know, you want a challenge, hey, fire up Final Fantasy mode and just play through the game again and just do it in New Game Plus, but it's harder now. And I'm just like, to me, that just doesn't appeal. Like, not all of us have the interest or the time to basically play through the game again from start to finish, just harder this time. I would rather experience a different type of difficulty while I'm playing my potentially only playthrough of the game. And again, that's where a game like Final Fantasy XII shines so much. Like, I don't need to do a New Game Plus of Final Fantasy XII. I can just do all of the side material in that, and the difficulty spikes and the different looks that you can get from that is so varied that by the time I got to the end of it, I was like, dude, I'm done. Like, you fight the judges at the end of the Zodiac Age, and you're just like, whew. Like, okay, that was a boss battle and a half. I think I'm done. I can kind of rest easy now that I've completed everything I want to do with this game. But with 16, it left me wanting. And even 13 had like the Grand Pulse area where, depending on how much you want to push yourself, you can start doing the Seath Stone missions before you move on to Chapter 12, and that can make things a lot more difficult for you. Like here, I basically did most of the hunts when I got the chance, and Svarog was the only one that ended up truly causing any kind of issue. So yeah, for me at least, the side material on that front was pretty weak, and from my own personal preferences, it was one of the worst aspects of the game. I will say a very quick word. I did remember the chronolith now that I mentioned it. The chronolith was good. I think I will give that credit. In terms of the challenge stuff, it was definitely one of the more challenging elements of the game, especially because I'd taken like 7 weeks off and I'd played like Witcher 3 in between. I was absolutely terrible, and so it did take me a little bit of time to do them. If I was fresh off the completion of the game, I do think I would have done it in like notably faster. But again, it was fun and it was more challenging. I definitely can't like deny that at all. But it kind of reaffirmed what we already knew about the fact that you can basically beat everything with all of the different Eikon groups. And so that in and of itself is still, to me at least, that's still a bit of an issue, that you can defeat everything so easily with any group once you know what you're doing with it. And so, yeah, that was one aspect. And two, well, because it's time trial based, that's, as a personal preference, I'm just not as big a fan of time trials anyway. But yeah, the chronoliths, I mean, fair play for including it. It did help a bit. But still, like, it doesn't move the needle enough on my overall opinion on the side material to say that, okay, because of the chronoliths now it's suddenly good. Like, it's a little bit better, but it's still not in the good category for me. Now, let's talk about, again, a bit more RPG elements and that kind of thing. Now, again, I'm no authority on what an RPG game really should be in JRPG, because I've barely played any of them. I can mostly base it on my Final Fantasy experiences and a few other games that I've played that of course have RPG elements too. Now, I will say that the crafting system was a huge disappointment for me. It was really bad. Like, what you can do in shops and like the blacksmith and stuff, I thought it was just flat out weak. It just wasn't that good. I think they tried to go for some kind of almost like Elden Ring-esque system where you could get like a weapon or an accessory and you can get like a +1, +2 and stuff, but you could only go up to +2, and you're constantly picking up like crafting materials as you go, and there's barely anything you can do with them. It just didn't work. Like even the stuff that you get like for upgrading a weapon, or like you get like, I don't know, you get +3 more attack, or you get like a rare accessory like an arm god or whatever it is, and it gives you like, oh, it gives you a +3 health, and it's like, come on, man, give us like some kind of passive abilities or something interesting. Like, surely there's got to be something there. And in that respect, it was very, very bare bones and just kind of not very interesting at all. I feel like you could probably mostly get by with the game not even really upgrading most of your stuff, and most of it just rely on your Eikon abilities. And if you're half decent, you could probably still complete the game without even ever really visiting the craftsman. So I think that stuff, it just really was weak. Like, they don't have to perform miracles for it, but I feel like a few little touches would have been beneficial. Like, you know, give us like accessory slot progression would have been nice. You know, start us off with 2 maybe, take it all the way up to 4 to give us like a few more options, change things up a little bit. It just wasn't very deep, and I did not appreciate the general like crafting system and that kind of stuff. Now, the Eikon abilities, I thought they were more geared towards action, spectacle, and fun as opposed to actual utility. And again, I heard this from a lot of people where they basically said it really doesn't matter which loadout you have. Everyone can complete the game just fine. You're not really going to struggle. If you want to do, oh, I only want to use fire-based stuff, I'm only going to use Ifrit and Phoenix, you'll be fine. Once you get Titan, you're like, I want to go all Titan, whatever it might be. Basically, you can win pretty effectively with any setup that you have. And again, on the one hand, that's a good thing, because you don't have to focus on, oh, is my build right? Oh no, I picked the wrong Eikon setup for this, that's why I'm struggling. So that's one way you can look at it, and it helps you to just have fun, enjoy all the different Eikons. There's not much penalty for using any kind of setup, so there's obviously good aspects to that. But then there's also, again, for me at least, a part of playing RPGs, playing Final Fantasy games, is that you do have to put some effort into preparation and setup. Like, you've all watched me play these games for years. You have to put some thought into, you know, what accessories do you have on? What equipment do you have? What abilities do you have? If you have a job system, which jobs are you leveling up? Like, are they going to be ones that's going to be useful for you? Are they going to be versatile? You know, if you have a black mage, they have the right spells. Do you have the right spells for your white mage? And you have to make sure you look at all of these. And there's times that you get it wrong, and you'll have to try something again. You have to change your setup somewhat. And that's part of the experience of playing through and fighting through a Final Fantasy game in most cases. And again, this game just didn't have it. It's just like, whatever you want, man. Just go out there, just have fun, just use your abilities. They're all cool. They're all great to play with. That's fine. And so it creates this double-edged sword for players that are looking for more. For where like combat isn't just a means to an end. Like, there's some people who they will happily take every single battle in the game being as easy as possible, and you don't have to think. You just you press the buttons that you need to, and you just get through very quickly, and you just continue to progress the story. And that's what they want from the game, and that's fine. But there's still definitely, I think, a decent chunk of people that's also like me, where they're still looking for some of that depth and that need to do things both before the battle and during the battle that you think are going to influence the outcome. You want to feel like you have some kind of agency in the outcome of a battle beyond just, am I able to dodge this attack, and am I able to fire off all of my moves when they're available? Like, there has to be more to it than that for the battle system and like for the gameplay and the RPG elements to reach, you know, a high tier. And this game didn't have it, and that's something that definitely fundamentally I just wasn't as happy about. And again, that extends into the battles themselves, where you have no status effects. You guys saw my reaction when, like, let's say, I don't know, you see an ice-based enemy and you try to hit it with fire, or you see a bird and you hit it with arrow. Everything does the same damage. And that is a quintessential, like, that just tells you, look, it doesn't matter what your setup is. Who cares if you have, you know, Garuda or you have Ifrit? Like, in terms of their magic, they do the same damage anyway, so just do whatever you want. And that's just not how you play Final Fantasy games. It just isn't, and it never has been. I mean, you can't play through how... I can imagine the comments if I was playing through basically any other Final Fantasy and I encountered an ice enemy and I was just firing off, even though I had fire, I just kept randomly firing off like thunder spells or arrow, because it doesn't matter anyway. I thought it didn't matter. You would all crucify me in the comments like, are you an idiot? Why are you not using fire? They're weak to fire. But in this game, it just doesn't matter. And so that kind of stuff, like, there's basically no buffs and no debuffs. You have a strength tonic and you have like a defense tonic. There's a few occasions in the game where they use bravery or like protect, but it was very few and far between. And the implementation felt very like they almost forgot. And then in like the last few weeks, they were like, oh shit, let's quickly find a few bits to just throw in this extra thing to make it seem like we've got like this element of the game, and it's just like it wasn't good enough. Bosses basically never used it. I don't think there was a single boss I remember that could cast protect on itself or something like that. It just never happened. And so there was no poison, there was no nothing. Like that was extremely bare bones, and that was probably the single thing that I hated the most about the gameplay. And so taking all of like the fun and like the spectacle and the adrenaline and all that kind of stuff, yes, that of course counts for something. And it helped keep the gameplay serviceable, and at its best it definitely was fun for like those short bursts. But as an overall gameplay experience, it definitely wasn't my kind of Final Fantasy. And it's probably one of the least Final Fantasy elements of the entire game. So if we're coming back to the whole, is this a Final Fantasy game? Sometimes when I was playing like the game, like the actual raw gameplay, I felt like I was playing a spin-off game. That to me was when it most felt like a spin-off. Like if Strangers of Paradise had this exact gameplay system, I don't think it would have gone amiss. Like people would have said, "Oh, okay, yeah, I get it. You know, it's Final Fantasy. It's got the spells. It's got Aero, Eroga, whatever." But like, you know, clearly from the way that the gameplay is, they're trying to do something that's a bit more kind of action-based and spin-off and that kind of thing. Like I don't think anyone would have been weirded out by the gameplay if Stranger of Paradise had the same gameplay as this game, for example. So there's definitely a lot of strong elements that do make it a Final Fantasy experience for me that I've already talked about. But the gameplay was one where I really didn't feel the Final Fantasy-ness when I was engaging in the gameplay. That was just my feeling on it. So yeah, that's the general feel of the gameplay. It was probably for me one of the least positive aspects of the entire experience, the RPG elements and the gameplay. The gameplay for 80% of the game. Again, let's say I don't count the 20% where you're fighting something that's meant to be a spectacle, it's meant to be high octane, it's meant to be adrenaline, it's meant to be exciting. For those bits, the gameplay system works. But for like 90% of the hunts, 90% of the random encounters, 95% of the random encounters, and most of the mini bosses, for me the gameplay just doesn't click. So that's how I felt about that. Now, in terms of the world, I still feel like it wasn't quite enough variety for my tastes. They did try to have some more of it. Like they had the more open areas, they had a bit more grassland, they had the desert, they had a few things here and there, but like again, comparing it to the best of the best, like the environments, they just didn't give me enough of that wow factor. And that's what I felt from the first trailers. And I would say overall I still stand behind how I felt in the trailers. Like the color palette in general was quite muted. There weren't enough areas that gave me a wow factor, that made me feel like I'm playing like a Final Fantasy. And I showed people, like, you know, the kind of the trailers for some of the earlier Final Fantasies. Like, let's just go from like Final Fantasy 7 and beyond, like the variety of different areas that you can go to in these games. Even like Final Fantasy 8, let's say, like imagine a city like Estar, for example. Imagine that place recreated in Final Fantasy 16 quality, and what you would feel when you entered that city. It would blow your mind. And that's just one place. Like, the game goes to space, it does all this kind of shit. Again, in this game, we had like the Bahamut spectacle where you were fighting in outer space and nebulas and all that shit. So for that very like small section of the game, okay, awesome, excellent. And of course, there's like, in general, it's not that just because there's lots of like castles and medieval town stuff, it's automatically bad. But again, give us like this, the interdimensional rift was one of the only areas of the game where I felt like, oh wow, like this looks really cool. This gives me like strong kind of Final Fantasy vibes beyond just, you know, the medieval stuff and the, you know, the grasslands and deserts and whatever. This place looked really cool. And it was barely even a playable area. It was basically like a corridor that you walk through to get exposition and to get some story. And that was a real shame. They could have made that bit into a whole section. Instead of having like the kind of chambers that you have to fight through to get towards a Mother Crystal, give us one of those in an interdimensional rift. Like, keep us there for like an hour, have us fight unique random encounters that you don't see in the normal game. That was one area where I was like, shit, like they could have done so much more with this. This place looks really cool. And so I would have loved to have seen a few more areas like the interdimensional rift. And in general, for my personal taste and what I like to see visually in a Final Fantasy game, it didn't appeal enough to put it in like somewhere that was like, it just didn't appeal enough. I prefer the aesthetic of Final Fantasy 8. I prefer, again, the variety of Final Fantasy 7. Again, if you look at the different areas that you go to in Final Fantasy 7, you know, you've got all kinds of places like the Forgotten Capital, and then you've got Cosmo Canyon, and then you've got Gold Saucer, and then you've got like the icy mountainous sections, and then you've got like the beach, and then you've got Midgard, that's its own thing. You've got Temple of the Ancients. Like, look at that look at that selection of areas, for example, and just look at the like imagine those areas all done in Final Fantasy 16 quality, and you can see what I'm starting to talk about. Final Fantasy 8 for its time, visually and like art direction and style wise, I always think it's awesome. Final Fantasy 10 again, like Macalania Forest, like the magical nature and the vibe of Macalania Forest. Then you've got the beaches of Besaid, you've got the big city of Bavel, you've got Luca, you've got Thunder Plains, you've got Zanarkand, both the ruins and then Dream Zanarkand. You've got Inside Sin, like the City of Dying Dreams and the Sea of Sorrow. Like, again, imagine all those places. Like, to me, that's fantasy. That's Final Fantasy. Visually, for me, that's Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy 12, amazing looking world. You've got, like, Sky City of Bujerba. You've got, like, the different types of forests. And you've got desert. You've got the awesome looking towns and cities. Final Fantasy 16, to me, just isn't on that level in terms of its world and what it presents to us in terms of the variety and just the general kind of visual aesthetic. So again, that's a very personal one, but for me, this game didn't do it for me. Like, what we did get, again, it was fine, it was okay, but it left me wanting more in that respect, for sure. And so I think overall that's most of the stuff that I want to touch on. I could probably go on for a while longer, but it's already going to be a very long video. I think those are the main things that are coming to mind right now. I think overall I will leave with my general overview kind of statement about this kind of stuff, and it's still this is what I felt fairly soon after completing the game and having talked to more and more people and formed my opinions more and more. I still definitely believe this, where this to me felt like a very top heavy game where whatever the core aspects that they wanted to get across were, and whatever the most important elements were, they really poured all of their heart and soul into it, and they did a great job with all of those things. But there just wasn't enough time, enough budget, enough passion, enough desire left over to do all of the rest of it. That's how I feel. So I think they kind of came into this with like, this is going to be about Eikons, it's going to be about their dominance, and it's going to be about those guys fighting for supremacy, and Clive's journey of basically gaining the power of all of the Eikons to defeat Ultima. And obviously that's hugely important because that is the story, that is the game. But it felt like so much of the budget and the production was in service of the moments where that is the most important thing going on, that there wasn't enough left for the rest of it. So what I mean is, examples of this I would say is, again, most prevalent in probably the battles, where just if you look at the gulf between your experience fighting like important story bosses versus fighting random encounters or most of the hunts, the gulf between them is probably bigger than any Final Fantasy I've ever played. Like it's almost like you're playing a completely different game, any kind of major boss battle. And so I felt like as a result of having to focus so much on these pivotal Eikon battles, they sacrificed bestiary size, they sacrificed the amount of hunts that they could offer. Maybe they sacrificed some elements of the gameplay, like for example, maybe status ailments, buffs, debuffs, all of that kind of stuff. It just doesn't work with the style of battles that they want to do for, like, let's say when you fight Titan. Maybe when it comes to the elemental affinities and the status ailments and the buffs and the debuffs, they just felt like all of that stuff would take away from the adrenaline and the momentum of fighting these big battles. And so they don't want you kind of wasting time and buffing and debuffing and prepping and all this shit. They want you to just really be in this high octane, like anime style, like big action adrenaline battle. And so maybe that's why they kind of bit the bullet and prefer to go with a system that focuses more on that. So I think that's one way in which it could have manifested. Another way I think is just the quality of generally the main story quests and the main cast and all of the elements to do with the main story versus the side quest material. I felt like the side quest material just kind of suffered as a result of what the main game had to be. Another example, stuff like the crafting. There's just no way they couldn't have made a better system. I have to believe that this wasn't their big grand vision for how they wanted the RPG elements and like the equipment system to be. I refuse to believe that. It has to be the case that like some sacrifices have to be made in order for that kind of most important 20% to be as good as it can be. And so that's why still my overarching feeling is that they really worked hard to nail the 20% of the game that matters the most. And that's why it's a difficult game to put into perspective, because that 20% for me is so important that it's not like, in terms of how you feel about the game, let's say, I don't know, 70% of how I feel is about that 20%, but I can't just ignore like the rest of the game, if that makes sense. So that's why I fall somewhere in between, thinking like it's an amazing game versus it's like a decent game. And overall, I would say that's where I feel like most of the kind of sacrifices had to be made. And if, let's say, you told them you get 2 more years to develop this game and you get 50% more of the budget than you had originally, there's just no way that, you know, you wouldn't have had a bigger bestiary, you would have had better hunts, you would have had more side quests, you would have had either more side quests or better side quests, you'd have had a deeper like RPG element to it, you would have had more crafting, more you know, item accessory capabilities, all of that kind of stuff. And potentially you would have had like, you know, an extra dungeon, you would have had an extra couple of areas to change things up a little bit. Maybe the finale would have been a more of a playable area, so like Joshua and Clive being able to actually fight through towards Ultima at the end, I think would have been super cool. But they basically kind of rushed it through in Origin. You arrive there and then you kind of just go more or less straight into the battle. I would have loved like a final dungeon with just Clive and Joshua. I think that would have been awesome. That kind of segues me into one of my other gripes to do with the game, and it's probably one of the final ones I'll talk about. There just simply wasn't the right kind of interaction between the main cast members of the game outside of like forced story interactions. For some reason at the start of the game they were much better with this. Like it absolutely peaked when Sid and Clive were exploring together, and I didn't feel it in that part of the game. And that's why, again, Sid was great and his sections of the game were quite strong when it came to that particular aspect. Together with Byron, it was also a little bit better as well, but overall, the amount of times where Clive had party members with him, I'm going to call them party members even though they're not kind of full party members, these guys have such a strong shared history, and the entire game is about their bond and their friendship and their unity and their will and their experiences together and their love for each other, all of that stuff. And how you can't have, like, the fact that they're questing together and they're traveling together, and there's so few instances where they will say anything to each other, like nothing. You could literally be running around for 10 minutes, just going around the world, like looking for things or just exploring, and they will not say really a word to each other. And to me, that was always such a big loss. They're not really a part of side quests. Even if they're with you, they're like part of the party when you're doing side quests. They almost never really have any influence on the side quests. They don't say anything. They don't really react to anything. If they do, it's like, you know, one line per quest or something like that. And then during the times in which they are around, there's just no talking between them. And I found that so annoying because can you imagine how much cooler it would have been if, say, in the final section, when you have Jill, Joshua and Clive all together, they tell a few stories to each other, they ask each other interesting questions, they crack a few jokes, they get to have some quality time together before the final battle where they may never see each other again. And so to me, that was a really big missed opportunity, and I felt like this game was so well built for it. Like, some of the other Final Fantasies don't need this as much, it wouldn't have worked as well, but for this game, it was there. Like, they really should have done it, and I felt like that was a misstep that I personally felt quite strongly about. And again, it might be something that was completely unnoticed by a lot of players, but for me at least, it was definitely something that I kept noticing, and I just kept rueing that it wasn't done better. And if you're looking for an example of where it's done better, like I mentioned in the LP, check out like God of War Ragnarok. Again, you have great cast members that have a great bond between each other, and the questions that they ask each other, the stories that they share, they're completely like unrelated to the main quest lines that they have. These are just, they can happen at any point in the game when you're exploring around and you're just doing stuff together. And to me, that really helps to world build, to expand the characters, to deepen their bonds, and just to make them more likable and interesting, keep those travel sections more entertaining. There's just so much utility to a well-done extra bit of dialogue and camaraderie between the cast that for those specific sections, I just don't think they utilize them very well. So that was definitely something I was pretty unhappy about, unfortunately. So all of these things I feel like could have happened if they just had more time and more budget. But when given the choice of what they had to really focus on and do, I think they had to make sure they nailed the story, the cast, the performances, and that sort of important 20% of the story and the boss battles and everything that come with it. And I think they really achieved that goal. And so where do I stand? I think I'm still definitely very positive about the future of Final Fantasy. And I say that because I still believe that some of the stuff that they achieved in this game was some of the hardest stuff to achieve in any Final Fantasy game or like gaming experience. And so if they can take what they've learned here from, like, you know, how to capture great acting performances, you know, how to make sure the emotional peaks and the adrenaline peaks of a story are done well, how to release a game that's complete and that runs well, provides value for money and that has entertainment value, that has accessibility to a wide audience despite like a, you know, an action-packed philosophy. Those are kind of things that trying to do all of those at once and then making it feel like a, you know, a Final Fantasy story, especially by the end, and doing all of those stuff well, in my opinion, that stuff is hard. And so if they've managed to achieve that, and I have no doubt that they're going to be looking at feedback and kind of thinking about what they liked, what they didn't like, what the fan response was. What we can always say is that no Final Fantasy that comes after another one is sufficiently like the one before, that the problems that you had with the previous Final Fantasy happen in the same way for the next one. Creatively, they're always going to go for something a bit different than what they did before anyway. I mean, if you look at sort of, again, like 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 15, 16, they're all sufficiently different from each other that you can expect 17 to not be another one that's going to feature, you know, mostly empires and medieval castles, and, you know, it's going to be very focused on the summons. And once again, the summons are actually going to be, you know, people, and they're going to have their dominance, and it's going to be people transforming into summons. They've done that for 16, so it's going to be a different concept, it's going to be a different world, it's going to be a different outlook. And so that's why I think for this one, despite everything that I wasn't a fan of, if they manage to still make me really like this game overall, then I have high hopes that for 17 they're going to retain what's good, because what they did well in 16, I think that's just universally applicable to all games. Like, getting the right cast and the right acting performances for a game will always serve you well. Like, that's one of the most objective kind of things, right? Just making sure that you nail the performances. The writing, I think, was generally done well, so if they keep the same writing team, I think they're onto a winner. Whatever's going to be, like, you know, the major boss battles, the major moments of the next Final Fantasy game, they know how to make those moments hit. They now know how to create a Final Fantasy that has more of a mature kind of theme, that deals with darker elements too. Can it be improved? Yes, but I think they've given us a different kind of experience for Final Fantasy that we've come to know from the past, so I think that can definitely work. And then why not, in the next game, have a bit of a different battle system? You know, the action elements and stuff were fun, they were good. There's definitely a lot of things that they can keep from the existing system, but maybe they are going to start to work things back in, like status elements, like buffs and debuffs. And maybe they're going to have a greater focus on, like, world exploration. Maybe it's going to be more mini games, there's going to be more kind of open, free travel. So many things are possible, and I think that this team in general, they've proved to me that they can release a quality game. But if they shift their focus, like, if they balance themselves more between the 20% most important scenes and, well, the majority of the actual gaming experience, where, like, maybe 15 hours of the game is spent during the more intense periods of the story and the battles, and then 40 hours is spent doing, like, you know, exploration, side quests, and all of that kind of stuff, then, you know, I feel like that 45 hours does deserve more attention than they gave it in this game. And so I feel like maybe the next one is going to have a better balance for that stuff. So I have high hopes. I think it's going to be good. And I do think they might be learning some stuff from Rebirth as well. There's no doubt about it. Since we have two different teams now, there's got to be some kind of competition between them. And hopefully it's healthy competition that's going to bring out the best in each other. So they're going to no doubt be looking at Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and seeing, what are people getting hyped about? What do they like about that game? And there's no way that they're just going to completely ignore that and say, nah, like, we're not going to include any of that out of spite or just because we think they're wrong. Surely if there's things that fans are really happy with and the game performs well, they're going to look at that and say, we need to either just include that in our game too, or put our own twist on it, but generally basically just try to provide something similar, maybe even do it better than they did. So that's why I'm confident, because I do think 7 Rebirth could help bring out the best in a potential Final Fantasy 17 as well. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it, because it's just, you know, the conversations are endless about this game. But if you do want to chat to me more about Final Fantasy 16, you'll have to catch me in the 24/7 Final Fantasy stream. That's where I like to hang out, and there I'm always happy to talk Final Fantasy with you guys. That's what it's there for. And so we can continue our conversations into the future with that. Now, we do have 2 DLCs to come. That is also worth mentioning. When I recorded all of my, like, Chronolith content and all that kind of stuff, I didn't mention the DLC because it wasn't announced yet. That's coming, and so how that's going to change my opinion on some of this stuff, that remains to be seen. I think for it to do that, it would need to probably be about Jill first, so that I can say, okay, Jill now has the content and the story that she deserves. And 2, there has to be some relatively significant and good like dungeon play, or like a, you know, boss battles or that kind of stuff to push a bit more of like the challenge and the side questing element as well. So if those two things happen, then it will go some way towards mitigating some of the things I like less, but it would be in the form of a DLC. So it's not quite fair to kind of, I guess, judge a game after its DLC as well. So that's what I will leave it with. Thank you all so much for either watching the series, or if you've just joined me for this long, rambly review, for listening to me rattle on about Final Fantasy 16 for so long. I do appreciate it, but this is the way that I can share my most authentic and I guess kind of finalized thoughts on the game, and I hope you guys appreciate it. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate the support for what has been a very long series, but I had a really good time with this game overall. And even though it does have numerous issues that I've mentioned, overall I think the future is bright. And I am looking forward to 17, and well, I am very much looking forward to 7 Rebirth. So if you haven't seen any of the 7 Rebirth material, I do have a preview on my channel that starts to give you an idea of what we're going to be working with. And I think for people that have similar issues to what I had with 16, I think 7 Rebirth is going to be the one, and we're going to have a great time. So thank you all for watching. I will see you soon. Take care.